The lecture hall was buzzing long before the professor even walked in. It was one of those oversized university rooms with steep steps and endless rows of wooden desks, where students carved their names into the sides and whispered secrets during class. Everyone knew today's lecture would be special, because Professor Harold Whitman had promised something unforgettable. Professor Whitman was famous on campus, brilliant, arrogant, sharp-tongued, and always perfectly dressed. He loved reminding students that he had published papers before most of them were born. He believed intelligence was everything, and he enjoyed humiliating anyone who couldn't keep up. At exactly 10 o'clock, he entered, adjusting his glasses and placing his leather briefcase on the podium. "Good morning, future disappointments," he said with a smirk, and the class laughed nervously. He turned to the massive chalkboard and began writing symbols that looked more like secret codes than math. Equations stretched across the board, layered and complex. "This," he announced, "is a problem even graduate students struggle with." Students shifted in their seats. Some started writing, others stared blankly. Then Professor Whitman turned around, eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'll make this interesting," he said. "Whoever solves this correctly, I'll marry you." The room exploded with laughter. "Of course, assuming you can solve it," he added, enjoying the reaction. Just then, the door at the back creaked open. A man in gray overalls stepped inside, pushing a mop bucket. His name was Daniel Carter, the building janitor. Mid-30s, quiet, always polite, rarely noticed. Most students had seen him, cleaning late at night or emptying trash cans early in the morning. He paused when he saw the full class, unsure if he should leave. Professor Whitman frowned. "We're in session. Come back later." Daniel nodded quickly. "Sorry, sir. I was told to clean the back hallway, but I'll wait." He stood near the wall, eyes down, hands resting on the mop handle. The students went back to staring at the equation. Minutes passed. No one raised a hand. Professor Whitman sighed dramatically. Disappointing. Truly disappointing. That's when Daniel looked up at the board. He tilted his head slightly, as if something caught his attention. His eyes traced the symbols, following each line, each variable. Without realizing it, he whispered that coefficient should cancel out. A student nearby heard him and snorted. Did the janitor just talk about coefficients? Another whispered, "Bro, let him try. Maybe he's a math wizard." Daniel realized people were staring and quickly looked down again. Professor Whitman noticed the murmurs. "Is there a problem back there?" One student pointed. The janitor was saying something about the equation. The professor raised an eyebrow and looked at Daniel. Do you have something to add?" Daniel hesitated. "No, sir. I was just thinking out loud." Whitman smiled coldly. "Well, since none of my brilliant students seem capable, perhaps you'd like to try." The class burst into laughter. Daniel shook his head. "I shouldn't, sir. I'm just here to clean." "Oh, come on," Whitman said mockingly. "Solve this equation and I'll marry you. Remember." More laughter. Daniel swallowed. He felt his face burn, but something inside him tightened. He had spent his life being invisible, underestimated, overlooked. He had learned not to speak up, not to draw attention, but he also knew something they didn't. Slowly, he walked to the board. The room grew quiet. He picked up the chalk, his hand steady. Professor Whitman crossed his arms, clearly entertained. Daniel began writing. At first, students thought he was just scribbling randomly. Then they noticed something strange. His steps were clean, logical. Each line simplified the equation further. A few students leaned forward. Professor Whitman's smile faded. Daniel continued, moving faster now, confidence growing with every stroke of chalk. He rearranged terms, applied substitutions, eliminated variables. The impossible-looking equation began shrinking, until finally he wrote the final answer. Then he stepped back. Silence filled the room. Professor Whitman stared at the board, then at Daniel, then back at the board. That's not possible," he whispered. He rushed forward, scanning every step. Students watched, wide-eyed, as their arrogant professor checked each line, muttering under his breath. It's correct," he finally said, voice shaking. A stunned silence followed. Then the room erupted. What the? How did he? He solved it faster than the professor. Professor Whitman looked at Daniel as if seeing him for the first time. Where did you learn mathematics? Daniel hesitated. I used to study. Used to? Whitman demanded. At which university? Daniel lowered his eyes. I dropped out. The class went quiet again. Professor Whitman straightened his jacket, clearly uncomfortable. Well, that was impressive. But this is highly inappropriate. You should return to your duties. Daniel nodded. Yes, sir. He turned to leave, but something had already changed. Students were whispering his name. Some were recording on their phones. One student shouted, "Sir, you said you'd marry him." Laughter returned, but it felt different now. Professor Whitman snapped, "That was a joke." Daniel paused at the door. Then he quietly said, "Sir, you shouldn't joke about things you don't mean." And he left. By lunchtime, the video was everywhere. Janitor solves impossible math problem, shocks professor. Students from other departments came to see him while he cleaned. Can you help me with calculus? Are you really a dropout? Why are you working here? Daniel kept his answers short and kept working. But someone else was paying attention. Dr. Evelyn Brooks, the university's Dean of Sciences, watched the video 3 times. Then she called Professor Whitman into her office. What exactly happened in your class today? She asked. Whitman cleared his throat. It was a misunderstanding. Did the janitor solve your problem? She asked calmly. Yes, but... And you humiliated him in front of students. I was joking. She leaned forward. Bring him to my office. That afternoon, Daniel found himself sitting across from the most powerful academic in the building. I watched the video, Dr. Brooks said. Where did you study before? Daniel hesitated. Met. For 2 years. Her eyes widened. Why did you leave? He looked at his hands. My mother got sick. Medical bills. I had to work. Silence filled the room. You realize you're wasting your talent here, she said softly. I need the job, Daniel replied. She nodded. What if I told you we could offer you a scholarship to finish your degree here? His head snapped up. Sir, Mom, I can't afford tuition. You won't have to. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. 2 weeks later, Daniel was no longer wearing gray overalls. He was sitting in classrooms again. Some students recognized him immediately. That's the janitor guy. But now they spoke with respect. Professor Whitman avoided eye contact. Daniel excelled in every class. Top scores, perfect assignments. Then came the academic conference. Professor Whitman was scheduled to present a paper on advanced modeling. But the night before, he discovered a fatal flaw in his calculations. Panicked, he went to Dr. Brooks. She called Daniel. Daniel reviewed the work in silence. You made an assumption that doesn't hold under these conditions, he said gently. He corrected the entire model in 20 minutes. Professor Whitman watched, pale and sweating. At the conference, the presentation was a success. Everyone praised Professor Whitman. He took the applause, but he knew the truth. Afterward, he approached Daniel privately. I owe you an apology, he said stiffly. I treated you unfairly. Daniel looked at him calmly. You treated me the way you treat everyone you think is beneath you. Whitman swallowed. You're right. Months passed. Daniel became one of the top research assistants in the department. Then he published his own paper. It went viral in academic circles. Offers started coming in. Meanwhile, Professor Whitman's reputation quietly faded. One evening, Daniel stayed late working in the lab. A voice behind him said, You still clean up after yourself, I see. He turned and saw Professor Whitman. I wanted to tell you something, Whitman said. That day, when I joked about marrying you, it wasn't just cruel. It was arrogant. I thought intelligence belonged to people like me. Daniel said nothing. Whitman continued, You proved me wrong, and you changed how I teach. Daniel nodded. Then maybe something good came out of it. Whitman smiled sadly. You're going to surpass all of us. Years later, Daniel stood on the same stage, now as a guest speaker. He looked out at hundreds of students. I once worked here as a janitor, he said, not because I lacked intelligence, but because life doesn't always care about your potential. The room was silent. Never judge someone by where they stand today, he continued. You don't know how far they've already come, or how far they're about to go. In the back of the hall, Professor Whitman listened quietly, and for the first time in his life, he felt proud of a student who had surpassed him, not because Daniel solved an equation, but because he solved something far more difficult. How to rise above humiliation without becoming bitter, how to forgive without forgetting, and how to prove that brilliance can exist in the most unexpected places.